Chapter 8. The Rubbish Chute. When Jenna threw herself into the rubbish chute, she was so terrified of the assassin that she did not have time to be afraid of the chute. But as she tumbled uncontrollably downward into the pitch blackness, she felt an overwhelming panic well up inside her. The inside of the rubbish chute was as cold and slippery as ice. It was made from a highly polished black slate, seamlessly cut and joined by the master masons who had built the wizard tower many hundreds of years ago. The drop was steep, too steep for Jenna to have any control over how she fell, so she tumbled and twisted this way and that, rolling from side to side. But the worst thing was the dark. It was thick, deep, impenetrable black. It pressed in on Jenna from all sides, and although she strained her eyes desperately to see anything at all, there was no response. Jenna thought she had gone blind. But she could still hear, and behind her, coming up fast, Jenna could hear the swish of damp wolfhound fur. Maxie the wolfhound was having a good time. He liked this game. Maxie had been a little surprised when he had jumped into the chute and not found Silas ready with his ball. He was even more surprised when his paws didn't seem to work any more, and he had briefly scrabbled around trying to find out why. Then he had bumped his nose on the back of the scary woman's neck and tried to lick a tasty morsel of something off her hair, but at that point she had given him a violent shove that had flipped him over onto his back. And now Maxie was happy. Nose first, paws held in close, he became a streamlined streak of fur, and he overtook them all. Past Nico, who grabbed at his tail but then let go. Past Jenna, who screamed in his ear. Past Boy 412, who was curled into a tight ball, and then past his master Silas. Maxie felt uncomfortable going past Silas, because Silas was top dog, and Maxie was not allowed in front. But the wolfhound had no choice. He sailed by Silas in a shower of cold stew and carrot peelings and carried on down. The rubbish chute snaked around the wizard tower like a giant helter-skelter buried deep inside the thick walls. It dropped steeply between each floor, taking with it not only Maxie, Silas, Boy 412, Jenna, Nico, and Marcia, but also the remains of all the wizard's lunches, which had been tipped into the chute that afternoon. The wizard tower was 21 stories high. The top 2 floors belonged to the extraordinary wizard, and on each floor below that there were 2 wizard apartments. That's a lot of lunches. It was wolfhound heaven, and Maxie ate enough scraps on his way down the wizard tower to keep him going for the rest of the day. Eventually, after what felt like hours, but was in fact only 2 minutes and 15 seconds, Jenna felt the almost vertical drop level out, and her pace slowed to something that was bearable. She did not know it, but she now had left the wizard tower, and was traveling below the ground, out from the foot of the tower and toward the basements of the courts of the custodians. It was still pitch black and freezing cold in the chute, and Jenna felt very alone. She strained her ears to hear any sounds that others might be making, but everyone knew how important it was to keep quiet, and no one dared to call out. Jenna thought that she could detect the swish of Marcia's cloak behind her, but since Maxie had hurtled past her, she had had no sign that there was anyone else with her at all. The thought of being alone in the dark forever began to take hold of her, and another tide of panic started to rise. But just as Jenna thought she might scream, a chink of light shone down from a distant kitchen far above, and she caught a glimpse of Boy 412, huddled into a ball not far in front of her. Jenna's spirits lifted at the sight of him, and she found herself feeling sorry for the thin, cold sentry boy in his pajamas. Boy 412 was in no state to feel sorry for anyone, least of all himself. When the mad girl with the gold circle on her head had pushed him into the abyss, he had instinctively curled himself up into a ball, and had spent the entire descent down the wizard tower rattling from side to side of the chute like a marble in a drain pipe. Boy 412 felt bruised and battered, but no more terrified than he had been since he awoke to find himself in the company of 2 wizards, a wizard boy and a wizard ghost. As he too slowed down when the chute leveled out, Boy 412's brain began to work again. The few thoughts that he managed to put together came to the conclusion that this must be a test. The young army was full of tests. Terrifying surprise tests always sprung on you in the middle of the night, just as you had fallen asleep and made your cold, narrow bed as warm and comfortable as was possible. But this was a big test. This must be one of those do-or-die tests. Boy 412 gritted his teeth. He wasn't sure, but right now it felt horribly like this was the die part of the test. Whatever it was, there wasn't much he could do. So Boy 412 closed his eyes tightly and kept rolling along. The chute took them ever downward. It turned left and traveled underneath the custodian council chambers, bore right to take in the army offices, and then straight on where it burrowed through the thick walls of the underground kitchens that served the palace. This was where things became particularly messy. The kitchen maids were still busy clearing up after the supreme custodian's midday banquet, and the hatches in the kitchen, which were not far above the travelers in the rubbish chute, opened with alarming frequency and showered them with the mixed-up remains of the feast. Even Maxie, who had by now eaten as much as he possibly could, found it unpleasant, especially after a solidified rice pudding hit him square on the nose. The youngest kitchen maid who threw the rice pudding caught a glimpse of Maxie and had nightmares about wolves in the rubbish chute for weeks. For Marcia it was a nightmare too. She wrapped her gravy-splattered purple silk cloak with the custard-coated fur lining tightly around her, ducked a shower of Brussels sprouts, and tried to rehearse the 1-second dry clean spell, to use the moment she got out of the chute. At last, the chute took them away from the kitchens, and things became slightly cleaner. Jenna briefly allowed herself to relax, but suddenly her breath was taken away as the chute dipped sharply down under the castle walls, toward its final destination at the riverside rubbish dump. Silas recovered first from the sharp dip, and guessed they were coming to the end of their journey. He peered into the darkness to try to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but he could make nothing out at all. Although he knew that by now the sun had set, he had hoped that with the full moon rising some light would be filtering through. And then, to his surprise, he slid to a halt against something solid, something soft and slimy that smelled disgusting. It was Maxie. Silas was wondering why Maxie was blocking up the rubbish chute, when Boy 412, Jenna, Nico, and Marcia cannoned into him in quick succession. Silas realized that it was not just Maxie who was soft, slimy, and smelled disgusting. They all did. "Dad?" Jenna's scared voice came out of the darkness. "Is that you, Dad?" "Yes, Puppet," whispered Silas. "Where are we, Dad?" asked Nico hoarsely. He hated the rubbish chute. Up until his leap into it, Nico had had no idea that he was terrified of confined spaces. What a way to find out, he thought. Nico had managed to fight his fear by telling himself that at least they were moving, and they would soon be out. But now they had stopped, and they weren't out. They were stuck. Trapped. Nico tried to sit up, but his head hit the cold slate above him. He stretched out his arms, but they both met the ice-smooth sides of the chute before he could straighten them. Nico felt his breathing coming faster and faster. He thought he might go mad if they didn't get out of there. Fast. "Why have we stopped?" hissed Marcia. "There's a blockage," whispered Silas, who had felt past Maxie and come to the conclusion that they had fetched up against a huge pile of rubbish that was blocking the chute. "Bother," muttered Marcia. "Dad, I want to get out, Dad," gasped Nico. "Nico?" whispered Silas. "You okay?" "No." "It's the rat door," said Marcia triumphantly. "There's a grill to keep the rats out of the chute. It was put up after Ender found a rat in her hot pot. Open it, Silas." "I can't get to it. There's all this rubbish in the way." "If you'd done a cleaning spell like I'd asked you, there wouldn't be, would there?" "Marcia," hissed Silas, "when you think you are about to die, a spot of housekeeping is not a #1 priority." "Dad," said Nico desperately. "I'll do it then," snapped Marcia. She clicked her fingers and recited something under her breath. There was a muffled clang as the rat door swung open, and a swish as the rubbish obligingly hurled itself out of the chute and tumbled down onto the dump. They were free. The full moon, which was rising above the river, shone its clear white light into the blackness of the chute, and guided the 6 tired and bruised travelers out to the place they had all been longing to reach, the riverside amenity rubbish dump.